Hello, sports history fans. I'm Harv Aronson from the Total Sports Recall podcast. You're about to jump into another thrilling sports history moment, but first let's dive into today's sponsor just in time for the holiday season. Introducing Art of Words, the brainchild of word artist Dan Duffy from Philadelphia. Dan meticulously crafts stunning images by handwriting relevant words from some of the greatest sports moments in time. These unique, budget-friendly illustrations are the perfect gift, sparking cherished memories and capturing hearts. Choose from city skylines, sports, history, and musicians to find a piece for everyone. And here's the exciting part. For that sports fanatic in your life, gift them a piece of their favorite team or player's history. Art of Words tells a compelling story. Explore collegiate stadiums, each meticulously crafted with every football victory etched in words. Or venture into baseball stadiums, handwritten with every player from the team's illustrious history. Don't wait. Order a print today for yourself and your loved ones this holiday season. Transform your wall into a gallery of captivating art and surprise your family and friends with a print of their own. Use code SHN15 at artofwords.com for a 15% discount on your order in November and December. Visit Art of Words, where words magically transform into stunning art, evoking cherished memories and touching the hearts of those you care about. Again, use the code SHN15 for a 15% off at artofwords.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, sports fans, and welcome to another edition of Yesterday's Sports on the Sports History Network. Today's guest is Tim Caso. Tim has almost 50 years of weight training and competitive weightlifting experience. He has represented the Northeast region in an international Olympic lifting competition. Tim has also done a lot of coaching. He was a weightlifting coach for a New Jersey high school and for various CrossFit gyms throughout the Philadelphia area. Tim was one of the first people to help me when I first started Olympic weightlifting, and he was extremely tough on me, which I didn't particularly like at the time, but years later I realized he was tough on me because he wanted me to succeed. We lost touch for many years, but we reconnected about 7 years ago through social media, and so today we have him on the show. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate your having me on your show.
Oh, you're welcome. So, the first question, I've interviewed 3 other weightlifters, and the first question is always the same. I'm interested to know, and our listeners are interested to know, what got you interested in weightlifting in the first place?
Well, when I was 11 years old, I started lifting for football. I just joined the local football team and thought weightlifting would be a good way to prepare myself. So I just started training, doing some very basic stuff.
Yep, that story is very similar.
Yeah.
Also with myself and other weightlifters I've spoken to, they first went into football, but a lot of the weightlifters I spoke to, they were lacking size, so they decided to go into weightlifting.
I was going to say, and I never grew up and never gave it up. So, as I said, I'm going to be 65 in a week or so, and I'm still at it.
Excellent. And what was your very first competition? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. My first competition was in a suburb of Pittsburgh. It was in a bar. The bar was, the platform was on the dance platform. The warm-up room was downstairs. And we had some big-time lifters there. Brian Derwin, Bob Giordano, Terry Manton. All these guys were doing 300, 300 in the snatch, 400 in the clean and jerk. And I remember the floor had these big jacks that held it up because of dropping the because Brian and those guys were dropping the weights.
Right.
And they were, and they were causing quite a racket. And I guess the owners were worried that the floor would collapse. So that was my first experience, and it was a lot of fun, man. I mean, I went, I totaled, which I remember one of the guys told me that was my objective, to total that day, and I did 198 in the snatch and 264 in the clean and jerk. So,
and
it was a lot of fun.
What weight class was that?
I was 198. And I weighed in, 190-ish, something like that. I'll never forget that meet. That was a lot of fun.
Yes, there was quite a few experiences I had like that. Remember, one time one of the competitions was in a elementary school classroom.
Okay.
So,
well, if I remember right, Mark, your first meet was my last meet, wasn't it?
That was
Vineland,
New Jersey. Yeah.
Yeah. That was my last meet.
Yep. Right. That was a real interesting experience too.
Oh yeah.
The funniest thing about that meet was all the other. I don't know. There was maybe 5 or 6 of us from the team that were lifting. And all the guys were in the second session, the heavier weight class. I was only in the 75 kilo class.
Yeah.
That session was in the morning, and we didn't want to have to go to both sessions. So you guys told me just gain one. All you got to do is gain a pound. So I ate a lot that week, and I thought I would make weight.
Well, I think you were light the morning of that meet.
Yeah.
Me and the guys were running around the gyms asking people for food so we could give it to you to see.
That's right. That's right. I was shoving bagels down my throat, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to lift, but that was a fun experience. So
it actually reminds me of the Master Nationals. I competed just this past March, and as you get older, I'm sure you realize your flexibility is somewhat lacking.
Yeah.
Your joints don't move as much as you like them to. So I had to stop all upper body training about 6 weeks before, so I can get my elbows around for the clean and put myself in the right position for the snatch and so on. But what happened was I lost weight. So the morning of the competition, I was scheduled to lift in the 102 kilo class. Okay, and I remember the weigh-in, and I was borderline, and I got on the scale, and the next weight class down was 96. Okay?
Right.
So I stepped on the scale, and all I saw was the numbers hitting 95, and 95.9. And then I remembered a trick that we taught. I don't know if you remember John Bryden. I taught him this trick up in Albany, that if you are overweight, you step on the scale and then you lean forward. That'll make you a little lighter.
Right.
Well, the same thing. It's the same thing if you want to be heavier, in that you lean backwards if you want to be a little heavier. So I remember that trick while I'm standing on the scale and watching the numbers just roll around 95, because I would have had to do what you did.
Right.
In your first meet, go eat pizza, go eat bagels to try to gain weight, and I really didn't want to. So I remember I just leaned back a little bit, and I saw the number go to like 96.02 or something, and I jumped off the scale, and I weighed in just barely into my weight class.
I have to remember that. It's good to know those tricks.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So, having trained at the Belleville Barbell Club myself for many years,
Okay.
I know what the conditions were like, especially in the summer, with the unbearable heat. But
Oh yeah.
unfortunately, by the time I started training there, a lot of the top lifters were either retired or
Yep.
they were nearing the end of their career.
Yep.
So tell us what it was like training with all these elite lifters and guys that were making the Olympic team.
It was one of the best experiences of my life. I still remember the very first day I stepped into Belleville, um, and the gym was just this one long corridor, maybe 30 feet wide, if that, and the roof was at an angle. And all I saw from end to end were all these weightlifters, throwing 300-400 pounds over their head, squatting 400-500 pounds. And it was just mind blowing because I was just some kid. I think my best squat at the time might have been in the mid twos someplace, and to look at these guys lifting was just so inspiring. It was it was moving to an elite level like in an instant.
Right.
There were 4 guys there who ultimately made the Olympic team. Phil Rapaldi was one of them. Phil had made the team 3 times. There were Brian Derwin, who ultimately became my training partner in 80 and 81. Bobby Giordano was there. Jerry Hannon, Mitch was there, and it was just such an incredible experience being around those guys. One of the things about being around lifters like that is that it elevated your game. I mean, you wanted to be like they were, and just watching them lift, I think, helped you be a more competitive and better weightlifter. It was really a fantastic experience.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Even though, like I say, by the time I got there, a lot of the lifters were gone, but you were
Yep.
still there. Brian was still
Yep.
there. Bucky
Yep.
was there coaching, and
Yep.
it was just. I have such fond memories of lifting there. Like you said, it
Yeah.
made you wanna do better.
Yep. And you just almost automatically learned by watching your other lifters. Training with Brian for 2 years really helped elevate my game. Watching Phil and Hannon and these guys really carried over to my own training as well.
Right. And the conditions, you want to talk about an old school gym. This was this was a hardcore old. This was no health spa or fancy gym.
No.
This was unbearable heat in the summertime. No windows. No.
Yep.
All we had was
Yep.
the overhead fan, and it blew the hot air around.
Yep. I mean, I wouldn't. I'm not even sure I would describe it as an old school gym. Old school gyms have windows, and we had one source of water, which was the sink. The bathroom was upstairs.
Yeah.
And it, like you said, it was just the heat. It was just unbearable. But when you're a kid, we were 19, 20 years old. When you're a kid, you don't notice these things. And if you remember, I mean, we used to train in sweats.
Yeah.
And not shorts or anything like that. Training in shorts actually never occurred to me until later. Well after I retired. But we used to train in sweats. I used to have to bring two sets of clothing just to get through your workout. It was so hot in there.
Right. Well, I think you brought up the sweats. I think the main reason we didn't wear shorts is because a lot of those bars at that time had very thick knurling, and it would just rip up your thighs.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to use the baby powder because then it made the platform slippery.
Right.
And then we
Right.
would, we would keep the bar at that time. The technique was keep the bar
Sure.
up against the thighs, and we would, after maybe a month, your brand new sweatpants would have holes in them, and we would have to get
Yeah.
stretches.
Yeah. We went through a lot of sweatpants, that's for sure.
So what other? So you spoke about your first contest. Then what was your? What other contests do you have memories of?
That stand out to me. Let's see. After that, I remember I went to New York, Lost Battalion for a meet, and then to Albany. And for whatever reason, I always had a good meet up in Albany. I remember I went for this one. I went 5 for 6, I think, and it was the first time I clean and jerked over 300 in a meet. Probably my best meet stands out the most, and that was a couple years later. That was at the McBurney Y in Manhattan. That was a lot of fun. I always lifted well there. In fact, that was my second meet. And when I was a kid, I only lifted there 3 times, and my second meet was at McBurney, and I actually won it. Which was kind of exciting for my second meet. I did 203 and 286. I'll never forget it. And I won it on the last lift. So that was kind of neat. And then years later, that was 78. So 3 years later, I was there. I was a better lifter, at that point. And I did my best snatch there. I did 297, went 3 for 3. I did 275, 286, 297, and felt good for more. And then, I did 363, 374 in a clean and jerk, and kind of petered out. And then I remember I followed myself and tried 380, and that wasn't gonna work that day. But nevertheless, 5 for 6. It was a lot of fun. Brian was there coaching me through that day, so it was a very gratifying, fun day. And after that meet, I was selected for the Region 1 versus Canada meet, which was in towards the end of 1981. I think it was December of 81 up in Montreal.
And how did that meet go?
It went well. I went, let me think, I went 4 for 5. I do remember I was exhausted from the trip, and the accommodations weren't great. So I was kind of tired by the meet. And one of the things that was interesting that I figured out much later was there's that ring at the end of the bar where you kind of use as a guide to where you put your hands for the snatch. Well, this bar was the ring on this bar was several inches closer, and I didn't realize it at the time. So I didn't have a collar-to-collar grip, which would have made it a lot easier. I was maybe an inch outside the ring, and so what wound up happening is I wound up close grip snatching that day, and I still managed 286, and I did 374, and I topped out at 374 that day. But that was a lot of fun. It was an interesting meet. They were grooming kind of the second tier of weightlifters. At that point, it was the selection process was the best weightlifter in each category who hadn't traveled internationally yet. So they were kind of grooming a bunch of us to get to the next level. And I thought it was a really, really good idea.
Okay, so then after that, you had a knee injury that kind of curtailed your career?
Yeah, I had knee problems throughout my career, and I really think it's just a matter of overtraining. I mean, it was a tendonitis issue, and tendonitis, as most everyone knows, is an overuse injury, and just beating it up, wearing the shoes we wore, which had the heel, which put more pressure on your knees when you squatted, and did the other exercises associated with Olympic lifting, and it just wore them out. And I just had to take a break. I wound up having surgery in '83, I think it was. And the knee started coming back. And then what happened in '84, I think, it was '84, '85, I partially tore my patella tendon. And even though my squats and my lifting was coming along pretty well at that point, I was coming back from surgery. My best squats at the time was 500 for 5 reps. So the legs were really coming along. And then I got injured, and that was the end of it.
Right.
So end of any hope for, any kind of international team or what have you. So it was great. It was a great experience. No, it's all good.
Right.
I think if I had trained a little differently when I was at Belleville, it might have been a little bit, a little better. I think I should have trained probably 3 days as opposed to 4.
Yeah.
Give my knees that extra rest. But, you live and learn. When you're 20 years old, all you want to do is go to the gym.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us have a similar experience. When I look back at my Olympic lifting years, my biggest regret is overtraining. I had the same thing, I developed that really bad tendonitis, and I was, like you say, I was young at the time. I was stubborn. I wouldn't admit that I was overtraining.
Yep.
At the time, the thinking at that time was the more training, the better. And that's not always the case. And
no, rest is just as important as your time in the gym. But like you said, it's something we didn't realize back then. The philosophy was, one's good, two is better, and 3 has to be even better than that. So we just kept piling it on, not realizing that eventually you'd plateau and get injured. Excuse me.
Yep, exactly.
So when I train people now, I emphasize rest and the benefits of it and what you do while you're resting, stretch out, massage, those kinds of things.
Right.
Icing if you have to.
So you did quite a bit of coaching. Tell us about your coaching.
Yeah, I got into coaching probably 15 years ago, and it was almost by accident. A couple of people saw me doing some of the lifts in the gym and asked for help and so on. And then I started coaching at a CrossFit gym and just kind of teaching the class. And initially, I would have a lot of people and walking them through the lifts, and eventually the class wound down to just a couple people. And what I found was that the girls who were interested in weightlifting were far better students than the guys, because guys came in a lot of times with their ego, and they lead with their egos, thinking they already know how to lift, and
right.
You're not going to break me down, and I'm just going to lift the bar, kind of like you and I were taught when we were kids.
Yeah.
But that's the way I would train. And I remember I had 2 girls at this one gym that stuck with me for a year, and they were fantastic. They wanted to learn it from the start. They had no ego as far as that goes, and one especially was an experienced lifter, and I took her from start to finish. And she is one of my biggest regrets in terms of the fact that she never pursued weightlifting, because, she was one of the best athletes I had ever seen. She was built perfectly for Olympic lifting. I pulled her aside one day, had a little conversation with her, and she knew my background, excuse me, at Belleville with the guys who made the team and so on. And I told her that she was a better athlete than every single one of those guys. She had all the levers. She had quickness, flexibility, the strength. And I said, if you dedicate yourself to this, you could make at the very least, you could make the nationals.
Right.
And then, international teams would not be out of the realm of possibility, including the Olympic team. She was that good. But, there's one factor that is overlooked, I think, sometimes when we're looking at the athletes, and that's their competitive mindset. That's we used to call it a head. Brian, for example, Brian Derwin had an incredible weightlifting head in that he would get to a meet and he would generally outperform his training lifts. I remember in the 80 nationals, his best lift before that in the clean and jerk was 430. Well, he wound up doing 457 that day.
Right.
Okay, he put 27 pounds on his clean and jerk in a single meet. And that's the kind of head you need, the competitive mindset you need to be a successful lifter. Well, circling back to this one young lady, she didn't have that. She was kind of afraid of competition. I was trying to kind of encourage her just to go to a meet, just to watch, and she just wouldn't do it. And it was a shame because she really could have been successful. But the point is, with the two girls, they were terrific students. I had another girl, the other young lady I was training worked really, really hard. All she wanted to do was be a weightlifter. She wasn't a particularly good athlete, but she overcame a lot of that with her determination. I trained her twice a week. Eventually took her to a meet, and she went 5 for 6, and she set a personal record, and she won her weight class. I mean, she couldn't have been more thrilled. And I remember watching her lift, kind of like we used to do at the meets. We used to watch each other lift from the side.
Right.
And I remember watching her from the side, and all her lifts were perfectly straight. She did such a great job. And one of the most interesting aspects of her was that she had MS.
Wow.
And if she didn't have that affliction, I think she could have gone a lot further. And unfortunately, that really restricted her training during the 12 months I was with her. She had to stop for a couple of weeks here and a couple of weeks there because her ankles were hurting, her wrists were hurting, or whatever. Part of that, I think, was because of the lifting, but the MS was kicking in also. So she wasn't able to dedicate herself, and she had to rest. So she lost some valuable time. But if she didn't have that affliction, I think she would have been a decent lifter. I didn't think she would have been international material, but I think she could have made she could have competed at a national level.
Right. Okay, so then after you did some masters competitions.
Yep. It was interesting, Mark. In the interim now, from coaching those kids to now, back in 2015, I was still interested in lifting and squatting and what have you. I ruptured both quadricep tendons in 2015. They both snapped as I was squatting. Excuse me. I had to be ambulanced out of the gym, taken out on a gurney, and I spent 11 days in the hospital, had surgery, lost 15 pounds, and went through rehab. And it was quite a shock not to have legs, especially, after being a competitive lifter all this time. We both learned that the most important aspect of our physical well-being was your legs. That's where your power comes from. And I didn't have legs at that point. So it was a long, long road back, but rehab was very good. I was fortunate because I had been in, reasonably good condition prior to the injury. So my comeback was a little easier. The thing about it, knock on wood, and I'm very thankful, and I thank God for this, is that I've had no knee pain since my injury. And I've been able to do the lifts. I've been able to get my squats well over the 400 level. A couple of years ago, I squatted 440 for a single,
Wow.
which I never, ever thought I'd be able to touch again. So getting back to your question, I was able to train pretty hard for a while. One thing I did learn with this injury was patience, believe it or not. It was a long time coming, but as far as training goes, I started to learn how to train myself. And about a year and a half before the meet, I injured my hamstring. I was a little out of position, squatting heavy, and that's been actually a persistent injury. They're still. I injured my right one, and then overcompensated and injured my left one, and they're still a little tender, but the legs are starting to come back. So while I was training for the Master Nationals, I really didn't have a chance to heal properly, give myself time to rest, because I had to get to a qualifying meet. I had never gone to the Nationals before. So, I had to stretch every day, do the icing routine, try to squat, try to do the lifts, and all the while trying to heal. And, at 60 years old, 64 years old, it's kind of a long road to hoe. And, but made it through the qualifying meet. That was this past January. The competition, the Nationals, was a local meet to me, which is why I wanted to go. That was right in March. And I did okay. I did 154 in the snatch and 198 in the clean and jerk. And, that was more than enough to win. So that was kind of a fun meet. And since then, I haven't really done much Olympic lifting wise. I've just tried to heal my legs. My squats are getting into the mid threes again. And once I do reps with the 385s, 400 level, which I expect to do the first quarter of next year, I may start competing again. We'll see. I want to get my legs back into shape.
Right. Now, during your years of during your training, especially in your your younger years, what were some of your best training lifts as far as front squats, back squats, maybe split jerks from the rack?
Okay. My best fronts was I did 405 for a double. My best overhead was 405. And I did that pretty regularly. So I do remember one time in the gym, I locked out 4.25, but just couldn't squeeze myself underneath it. So 405 wound up being my best. My best back squat was 500 for 5 reps and 515 for a triple. I did that after surgery, after I retired from Belleville and was kind of training on my own. Let me think of what other I did. I do remember snatching 285 from the low blocks. Right. That was a fun day. I remember that like it was yesterday. My best clean and jerk was 391, and I did that in the gym. And my best snatch was 297. I did that, as I said earlier, at the McBurney meet in 81. I think that was. Pretty sure that was 81. So.
Okay, those are some big lifts. Now, I have in front of me your book. You wrote this maybe about 7 years ago. Weight Training for Old Guys is the title.
That's the one.
Tell us about your book.
Well, ever since I was a kid and I got into weightlifting, I always knew I was going to write a book about it. And I wanted to kind of write down the experiences that I had and pass the experiences and the technical training that I had on to others. And one of the things I wanted this book to be was different from the other books in that I wanted it to provide a significant amount of technical advice instead of just saying, hey, go squat, do 3 sets of 10. I wanted to explain how that lift worked.
Right.
Same with the bench press and the military press and so on. I wanted to emphasize technique because if you remember back in the day, our training rule, if you will, was technique first, strength second, body weight third. In that meaning that we had to learn technique first.
That's right.
Before you could pile on any kind of weight, we had to learn the lift. This is why we all started with a broomstick.
That's right.
So I wanted to convey that in the book, and I also wanted to make it a little fun. I have some anecdotes in there from lifting back in the day. There's one important section in there about spotting, because one of the things that people don't know how to do, to me it's terrifying in the gym, is that people don't know how to spot. Don't know how to spot for somebody to bench. Don't know how to spot somebody to clean to do the back squats, or when they're back squatting. I mean, so I have a short section in there about how to spot. In fact, I have a picture of me squatting heavy, and the coach and one of the guys there is spotting me.
Right.
So it's so critical. The safety in the gym is so critical, and I think learning how to spot is a very important aspect of training.
Well, I agreed with so much of what you wrote in the book that you inspired me to write my own book. And
I'm glad.
one of the things you just mentioned drives me crazy too. The spotting. I never could really grasp the idea of someone doing a tremendous amount of weight on a squat. So some of these powerlifters, they're doing 700-800 pound squats, and they have a guy standing behind them. And now what's going to happen?
Dangerous thing ever.
What is that guy behind you supposed to do? If you get stuck, he's going to grab 800 pounds off your back. Or what if you lose your balance?
What if while you're squatting that enormous weight, the lifter gets injured?
Right.
And now pulls a muscle or something, and now can't lift that weight.
Exactly.
Okay, what are you supposed to do? Grab the 800 pounds? I mean, I remember once spotting Brian. This was before, I think it was before 81, or I don't remember. It doesn't matter. The set was going to be 455 for 10 reps.
Right.
And I was on one side, another one of the lifters was on the other side, and we clasped our fingers together and followed the bar up and followed the bar down. And as I said, the set was supposed to be 10 reps. He made 9.5.
Right.
Okay. He started up on the 10th rep, couldn't make it. That was just routine, man. We just grabbed the bar, helped him up, put it on the rack. Another day at the office.
Right.
Okay. Whereas if we had one guy behind him, I can't imagine what that. We never even considered spotting from behind. So it's such a simple thing, but most people don't know how to do it. Even in competitions, they don't know how to do it.
You're right. I'm horrified at some of the things I see in competition.
Oh yeah.
Now, do you still follow Olympic weightlifting as far as being a fan, watching it? And
I'm a fan of it, certainly. I'll never lose that. I really haven't stayed up to speed, if you will, with the current weightlifters. I mean, they've changed the weight classes, I think 2 or 3 times since we were lifting.
Yeah.
So it was hard for me to kind of really get that interested in it. And our lifters, the Vardanians, the Riegerts, the Zlatevs of the world, all started to retire. And after that, I wouldn't say I lost interest in it, but I would say that, other things took priority and kind of lost touch with following it as much as I did. There was a publication called the International Olympic Lifter, and that kind of went out of business in I think it was the mid '80s, and I was a subscriber to that, and once that happened, I really kind of fell out of it in terms of really following it the way I used to.
Right, I find it much more difficult to follow because, like you said, they keep changing the weight classes.
Yeah.
And now the countries are all, since the Soviet bloc, whatever you want, since that collapsed, all the countries have split up, and you don't know who's lifting for what country, and countries you never even heard of before, and so it makes it a little more difficult to follow. But my son got me up to speed on it a little bit because he watches there's a program they have called Weightlifting House. And there's
Okay.
They're pretty informative. They keep you up to date on what's going on.
Yeah.
So now, other than weightlifting, what are some of your? I think you have. I guess you could call it a hobby, which I thought was pretty interesting, kind of unique. You're pretty fascinated with turtles, from what I understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Mark, ever since I was a kid, I was a fan of dinosaurs, and actually still am. And turtles were probably the closest thing, and they remind me of dinosaurs. So I've gotten over the years, I had a tremendous interest in them. At one point, oh gosh, I think I had maybe 15 or 20 of them. And and since then, some have died, and I've let a number of them go, and I'm actually just down to one. I've had this guy probably 20, 25 years at this point, and he's knock on wood, he's still chugging along. He's hanging in there. So yeah, turtles have always been a fascination for me.
And any other hobbies that you're involved in?
Yeah, probably one of the most important things to me. I've always been a reader of World War II, and excuse me, and I've been fascinated with the topic for probably 40, 45 years, and read a number of books on it. And over the last maybe 5, 10 years, I've been more interested in anecdotal episodes in the war, this tank platoon or this soldier's experience and so on. And I came across a story on Facebook, of all places, about a woman who had helped save over 2,000 children from the Nazi Holocaust. She was in Warsaw. And long story short, I got interested in that story, read a couple books about it, and decided that I really wanted to tell her story. She's been referred to as the female Dr. Schindler. Everybody's heard of Schindler, Schindler's List, but very few people have heard of Irina Sendler. And she saved far more people than Schindler ever had. And she did it hands on. I mean, she went right into the Warsaw Ghetto and smuggled children out in a number of different ways. And she was a young lady at the time. She was in her early 30s when she took on the Nazi regime. Her and a number of her collaborators. So I decided a couple things. I wanted to establish an Irina Sendler Day in Pennsylvania, which I did in 2018. And that was just for one day. It was just February 15th of 2018, but I had to petition the Harrisburg legislature to make that happen. I have my ex-township, place I used to live, was nice enough to let me set up a memorial to her. So I have there's a plaque there with her image and a description of what she had done, mounted on a large stone in this park. And that was all very well, but I wanted to come up with a mechanism where I could tell the story a little bit more proactively. So my son was in theater, and I said, I think I'll just write a play about her. So I decided to write a play in 2018. I decided to write a play about her, and it took 5 years, a lot of prayers, and a lot of research, and dozens of articles, and finally got the play to where it was ready for the stage. And this past year, I decided to produce it. We were moving along. It was going to be shown actually last month, but we had some technical issues in the with the crew that really couldn't be overcome. The play is quite demanding from a technical standpoint, from lighting and sound and so on, and the crew really couldn't figure out how to overcome it, so we had to postpone it, and we're going to do it next year instead. Okay. So it's still certainly something that's going to happen. It's just going to take a little longer than I had hoped, but nevertheless, it's a fascinating story, and I'm really looking forward to telling it.
Oh, excellent. I just wanted to backtrack a little bit. One more final topic because didn't really touch on it as much as I would have liked. You mentioned like when I first came to Belleville, and you first came to Belleville, which was before me. You
Yep.
mentioned the broomstick, and that
Yep.
that's the story I always like to tell because when I
Yeah.
first got there, I knew a little bit about the clean and jerk. I was doing clean and jerks down my basement. I didn't know
Okay.
anything
Same here.
about the snatch at all. I
Yep.
didn't know how to snatch, and so when I got to Belleville, Bucky, the coach, handed me a broomstick and said, "This is what you'll be using to learn how to lift." And I
Yep.
tried to explain to him, "No, I know how to do the clean and jerk." No,
Oh,
you
probably the worst thing you could have said.
don't. He said, "Oh no, you don't."
That's right.
And he had me using that broomstick for about a month. I mean,
Yep.
he let me do squats and all that because
Yep.
I knew how to do
Yep.
that. But he said, "No, you're not doing any weight on the Olympic lifts. You'll be using this broomstick
Indeed, you weren't. That's right.
until you learn the technique."
Um, yep. Yep. Well, like you said earlier, technique first, strength second. And yeah, man, the broomstick. I remember teaching the girls this, and uh, the one girl who had the MS took a break, and she started to come back maybe a year later. And I said to her, I said, Kate, we got to get on the broomstick again. Um, and she was I was teaching her leg press. I was teaching her squats again, and so on. And I said, Kate, do you remember when we first started how you were trained? And she turned to me and said, yeah, you had me train on the broomstick for a month. And I said, right. I said, but how did it wind up?
Yeah,
And she said, yeah, she said, yeah, it wound up great because, you can't learn it trying to actually lift weights.
right.
You cannot learn it that way, or I shouldn't say you can't learn it. It's very, very difficult
Yeah,
to learn it. In fact, one of the things I started to do with these lifters was different from what I learned and probably from what you learned or how you learned it. I mean, is that I took them from the blocks down to the floor.
right.
So I started them at the medium blocks where the weight was just below the knee and had them just come up, come up, come up, come up, and then taught them the second pull when they mastered, that aspect of the lift. I lowered it down a little bit to the lower blocks,
Right.
had them lift for a couple months from the lows, and then finally we went down to the floor. So that transition from medium to low to the floor was a lot easier from a learning standpoint than trying to learn it straight from the floor because there are so many moving parts, if you will, so many things that are happening in sequence from the floor up. That's very, very difficult to learn the lift when you have to do the entire lift from scratch.
That's right. Absolutely. The one thing I remember, you one of the advice that you gave me when I first started lifting, and I must have heard these four words about 100 times every night, was shoulders over
Okay.
the bar, shoulders over the
Yep.
bar.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. That's the hardest thing for people to maintain because the natural inclination is to pull back,
Right.
is to stand up straight. Because when you get out of your chair, you just straighten up.
Right.
Okay, so you're the natural movement is for your shoulders to come back. Well, for Olympic lifting, that's a different matter. Your shoulders have to stay in the same plane until a certain point, and that's when you shift and finish the pull. And one of the things Brian had explained to me when I was lifting for maybe a year or so, when I was starting to just I don't know if the word would be complain, but to say, gee, to observe that this is really doesn't feel right. My wrists have to be here, my elbows have to be there, and my chest has to be here, my head, everything seemed so out of place. And I said that to him, and I said, Brian, I feel like a contortionist. This is crazy. And he said to me, I'll never forget, he said, weightlifting is not comfortable.
Yeah, that's true.
And especially at first, because, everything's going to feel out of place. It's going to feel a little wacky. But it gets comfortable once you learn it.
Right.
And once you learn it, it makes complete sense. But you have to have the patience and give yourself the time to learn these movements properly. That's why we start with the broomstick.
That's right. So for any youngsters out there that are interested in Olympic weightlifting, patience is a key. And
absolutely.
Your book, okay, so for any older guys that still want to keep lifting weights or think you're too old to lift weights, we have Tim's book. This is still on Amazon, Tim?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yes, it is.
The name of the book is Weight Training for Old Guys, and the subtitle is Good Advice for the Rest of Us. And that's you can find that on Amazon, and that's by Timothy Caso. So it was great having you on the show, Tim.
It's great to be here. Thank you very much.
It was good to talk to you again after all these years.
Sure.
So all the best to you, and
same here.
Keep training, and we hope to see you in competition again real soon.
We probably will. Thanks again, Mark, and God bless, and appreciate your time today.
Thank you. God bless. Bye.
Take care.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Hello, football friends. This is Darren Hayes of the Pigskin Dispatch podcast, and I'd like to invite you to the portal of positive football history, Pigskin Dispatch and pigskindispatch.com. We talk about everything that centers around the game of American football, expert discussions, the origins of the games, the great players, teams, and coaches, and more, and some great guests and insights from experts. We have new episodes 3 to 4 times a week, and you can find us on sportshistorynetwork.com, pigskindispatch.com, or your favorite podcast provider.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.